Welcome to Wellness Radio with Dr. Jeanette-Gallagher as your host. Her show discusses topics of health, wellness, and spirituality, and is about discovering your place in this great universe, from your cells to the cosmos. Along with her guest, in casual conversation, she strives to ask the difficult questions that may be holding you back from a vibrant life, and shares new ideas that may inspire you to make a change in your life that you only can see in your dreams. And now, here is Dr. Jeanette-Gallagher.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Wellness Radio. This is Dr. Jeanette-Gallagher, and it's a pleasure to have you with us here this evening. Tonight, we are going to be talking about the rumbles in our life, our emotions, our feelings, the tumultuous obstacles along our life path. What is it all about? Did we take a wrong turn? Did we go left, not right? Perhaps maybe we did something wrong and we need to do better. Or even still, we say, oh my gosh, am I ever going to learn my lesson to be able to attain, be, or uphold a standard that we believe that we must be in this world? What is it all about, this human existence, this human experience, and the way in which we engage in all of these aspects of life and energy that seem to be coming our way? They seem to just float up, and you can almost stand outside and say, oh my gosh, what is that? All of a sudden, I feel something. I'm sensing something. It's okay. You're just reading energy. It's not always about you having the ownership of everything that goes on around you. How can you really decide how you want to be, what you can take, what you can let go, and how you can process your world going forward? Today, my guest is Brad Garrett. His book is Take Control of Your Life, Overcoming Life's Obstacles, Difficult Emotions, and Problem Behavior. And what Brad and I will be talking about is exactly that. How do you navigate your life in the year 2023? Brad, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for having me as a guest. I really appreciate this, Dr. Jeanette.
I'm so glad to have you, Brad, because I think this is definitely a topic where everybody is now saying the world is changing too fast, and I feel like I'm getting sucked into a black hole. Don't you think that many people are saying so much is going on and they're really kind of losing their way these days?
Yeah, I see it quite often. I hear it quite often where the last few years has been very disruptive in people's lives. And as a result, it's kind of caught them off balance and has created some problems that probably wouldn't have been there had we not gone through a pandemic and gone through the different aspects of that pandemic and the crisis that kind of followed. So emotionally, I think people are a little bit more raw, a little bit more sensitive.
You know what? In a way, though, I kind of look at it as, if you look back, let's step back. Most of us can't even remember the year, but maybe 2018 or 2019, and we say, oh, things were rocking and rolling. We were good to go. We were kind of on this, as we would call it, a high. We got it. We got this. Everything's going just hunky-dory for many people. And then when the pandemic came along, people kind of had to say, oh, you mean that all of those things out there don't always support me? I don't always have to show up for those things. I don't have to be that person that perhaps maybe they were striving so hard to create a fake persona that maybe that now the pandemic kind of in a way says, let's strip all of that extraneous information around you. Let's see who you really are. So in a way, we can look at it as some people call it a negative aspect. However, maybe it probably was the best thing for most people.
Well, I think it did definitely shake things up for people, and during these types of things, you can reevaluate your life. As a therapist, what I have heard more and more often is that for many people, it was like being on roller skates and all of a sudden you lose your balance.
Right.
And you fall, and now when you get up, you're not sure whether you want to keep going forward again or whether you just want to stand here or stay here. Because for many people, it was very confusing. It's very disruptive because we are creatures of habits. We have behavioral patterns that we follow pretty much every day. And breaking those things up can be good, but at the same time, it can be very disruptive and confusing for many people because all of a sudden things that they've been used to has just kind of gone.
Right, but really, I think your book is wonderful, Take Control of Your Life in a way, because what it's teaching you is what kind of hold does that emotion, that feeling, that perception, or that experience actually have over you? And are you leaking out of yourself and giving that center more control over yourself? You're leaking out your power, so to speak. In other words, before, you may have been really good in your job and high in the thing and blah, 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 blah. But then when your job went away, you realized, oh, I'm not the job. I'm something more than that. So in essence, do you think that perhaps when you talk about the word take control, I wrote down in the front of your book, reining in your leaky power doors, and it's time to power back up again. Isn't that what your book is about?
Yeah, it's the problem is that I worked with juvenile probation as a therapist for 23 years, and one of my responsibilities was to provide anger management, stress management groups for kids, corrective thinking for kids, because a lot of these kids are in the developmental phase and they're still learning how to navigate life. It's a very important developmental period of a person's life is the teenage years. And what I saw is kids that were coming into the system on criminal charges had a lot of difficulty controlling their emotions. They couldn't control their circumstances. They couldn't control other aspects of their life. And it was coming out in a lot of negative emotions, especially anger, which led to a lot of violence. Other issues such as depression because of a certain sense of hopelessness of not being able to get out of circumstances that they seemed stuck in with family or with past experiences that had happened to them. They didn't know how to deal with them. And so they were coming in with a lot of emotions. And just as a little side note, I know that there was a big push during most of the years I was in juvenile court to identify kids with mental health issues. And I took a different perspective with most of the kids I saw, got to know, got to interview, in that I saw the mental aspects of what we would call mental health as a result of a kid's inability to control their emotions. So it was presenting as mental health issues, but they weren't true mental health issues.
Yeah, it's really about the environment that they're in, how they were raised, the food they are eating, how they react to their environment, the people that are around them. There's so many aspects to the way in which we present in the world and in how we try to navigate. Don't you think that there's never, ever one path, but definitely it's about being able to say, what is the best for you? How can we support you to have a better life today? Isn't that the goal? Yes,
it's to help them navigate the things that they're going through and be able to identify who they really are, because that's the crisis of the teenage years is, who am I? And a lot of rejection of parental upbringing, parental teaching, parental stuff, because they want to find out, okay, who am I? So there's some rejection of all those things they grew up with, and then they're out there in this kind of wilderness trying to figure out who they are. And unfortunately, much of that comes through their peers who don't know who they are either. So what it's all about is saying, from my book is that, look, although you have all of these things going on in your life, although you're having difficulty controlling your emotions, controlling your behavior, that you really do have the ability to take control or to take responsibility and to change the course of your life. Well, and the problem, though, is that the anger was coming out in criminal behavior, violent behavior, which I work with a lot of the violent kids and trying to help them understand that the things that have led to your anger, you can deal with these things, you can get over them, and you can, improve the course of your life. And many of the kids did, and there were some that didn't get it and just kind of kept on going the same path.
Let's talk for a second, Brad, about when you say where do emotions begin, do you think that perhaps like emotions is that feeling? It's almost as if when you go outside, you could feel it's really cold and it have a sense in your body. Someone yells and screams, you have another sense in your body. Perhaps you burn your hand, that's another sense in your body. So when we start to have these feelings of something, of energy, of a shift, of a change, it affects our body and it triggers something in our mind. And even so, you say, oh, where did that come from? But it's what your reaction then is that seems to be the imprint. Yes?
Right. There are the things that precipitate the emotion, and then there's the things that follow the emotion. And they're all one. But a lot of times people don't see the connection between what the real precipitators are, because they externalize those precipitators instead of taking a look that the precipitators truly are internalized responses to external events.
But when they turn around then and lead a life with a very closed vision of life, because they say, oh, I've been there before and that hit me, that hurt me. Or I went there before and I had this response. They end up cloaking themselves with all of those negative responses as their identity, and they aren't able to branch out and have a different response or have a different reaction or make a different choice. I think sometimes they get boxed in. Have you found that also?
Yes, absolutely. I personally am come from a psychological perspective of being a behavioral, in part, psychologist, and we are creatures of habit. We're creatures of routine. We're creatures of pattern. And what people don't understand with emotions is typically emotions become ingrained into our behavior patterns. And so, therefore, the next time we feel this emotion, even though it might be a different circumstance, that our behavioral responses tend to be very similar and repetitive, so that we never come out of it. And then all of a sudden we just identify as, oh, this is the way I am. This is the way I behave, which is not true. It's the way you've been taught or the way you've been trained to behave through your past experiences. But all of that can change if you want to.
Yeah.
I thought, real quick, as a different little side note, I supervised domestic violence for about 3 years, therapists in domestic violence. And, you would see the same type of thing within these men. And there were some women in there, too, who had reacted in a violent manner and repetitively, some of them, towards their spouses. And it had become ingrained into their behavior pattern in their relationship. And many of them had no idea that they could change it when they first came in to get therapy, because they were court ordered. So they had to go as part of their part of the process of getting out of court and under the oversight of the court system. But one of the interesting things, and this is just a perfect example of how quickly things can change, for some of those men, all it took was changing a thought, which was, I don't ever want to get arrested again. Therefore, I'm not going to hit my spouse again.
Right.
And in being able to change that, it was able to change their behavior. Now, they still had the anger, but at least they were able to change their behavior, and the majority of those men never came back.
Yeah. I think sometimes when we say we need you to not have an emotion, you need to curtail it, it tends to build up inside of you. It will be, some people will ruminate on it. Others will become very physically ill over it. Still others will try to find a way to supersede or undermine things to be able to have that release of that emotion that they're holding on to, don't you think?
It happens all the time, and that's the typical response. I think the part that most people miss is that in these negative emotions is that they're meant to teach us something about ourselves, and that's the part that's usually missed. So typically we're focused on trying to, learn how to live with this emotion, learn how to behave differently with this emotion, but the bottom line is, what is it that the emotion is trying to teach you about your life? Because if you can understand what it is, so take for anger, for example, if what I'm doing is using my anger as a way to control others, I need to understand that if I'm going to learn how to deal with my anger and not allow it to affect my behavior going forward.
Right. You wrote in your book about high energy and low energy, and I think sometimes people get addicted to the good feelings, and they kind of, you would call it reciprocity, kind of, this feels good and I will get that from it. Or if I have a low energy, this is what happens, and, then I'm chastised or whatever. But in essence, when it's a higher low energy, it's a feeling inside of you. But are we coming to the point where perhaps you can step back and say those are experiences and feelings and senses, but they aren't, it's not something I have to, in other words, if I have a really bad experience, I don't have to say, I need to go to anger. Anger needs to control me. Anger needs to be really crazy. I need to go out and wreck my car, kind of idea. You could say, I'm feeling anger, feel it inside, and then step back and stop and let it just diffuse. That's ultimately the goal, which 99.9% of the people will say, well, I really can't do that. But however, that's where we can see it in our mental mind. Do we have the ability to do that? To, even if it's a low energy or a high energy or a bad experience or a good experience, can we see it for what it is, step out of it as ownership of it, and then just say, okay, I'm just going to let it diffuse. So in other words, not always constantly feeding the thing, kind of, so to speak, as like your little cohort that comes along with you. You know what I mean? Perhaps?
Right. And I agree with you up to a point, because this is the part where I don't see a lot of therapists taking clients. Most of what we do as therapists is teach people how to manage their emotions. And what we mean by that is what you said. And when I would work with people or teach people, to me that was kind of the beginning phase, that you don't always have to react to the emotion and react to the event that just happened in your life. And so what we end up doing is that most people who have anger problems are referred to anger management. So anger management says, okay, you're feeling angry, so now can you just hold on to that emotion and not act out in a way that might be harmful to you or harmful to other people? And I agree with that. I don't take anything away from it, because in the process of what I tried to do with those that I worked with was to take them through that process, to take them beyond that to where you could come to the point where you don't even feel the anger anymore.
Right.
And so as you're going through the process, that you truly do come to a point where you're in control of these negative emotions, because we want the good emotions. The negative emotions are going to crowd out all of the good emotions. You can't have joy and be angry. You can't be depressed and have peace. You know, those good emotions don't live in the same house with these other negative emotions. So my goal was always to take them through the process, but get them to a point where they could truly say that, you know, anger doesn't have control over me anymore. And the way I would explain it to them is, you might have that instantaneous response, which the emotion is an instantaneous response to a circumstance. I said, you might have that instantaneous response, but knowing that you're in control, it dissipates, it's gone, it doesn't go anywhere. And so you truly have control over emotions like anger, anxiety, stress, discouragement, disappointment, depression. But it's learning how to be able to do that. And one of the biggest problems I see with people is getting them to believe that they can come to that point in their life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think also, too, the idea of the mind. What is the mind? The mind is, it's almost like this super highway of words, of feelings and energy, and it's just all out there. It's just what we pick and choose that we bump into, or that what we feel triggered by, or perhaps feel is pushed on us. But the mind, in essence, has so many other choices to either partake or not partake in all of that other conversation that's out there. You know, sometimes kids will say, but this is my only choice. But perhaps it's not your only choice. Maybe you're just dialed in to that station on the radio, right?
Well, they've been so conditioned so that to them, it is their only choice. They don't see other choices. That's one of the reasons why I would do corrective thinking classes, to say you have a lot of choices. It's just that right now where you're at, you don't even consider them. So I always had a little formula that I tried to teach the kids, which was thinking leads to choices, choices to behavior, and behavior to consequences, to help them see that these things are all connected. And in doing that, I would always try to get them to focus, because most of the kids I saw in the criminal system never made it to that final step, consequences. They were typically, they get the thought, they act, they make the choice to act, and so you have the behavior, but not too many of them would ever think about consequences. The kids I got to start thinking about consequences were able to change their behavior, because now you've added an ingredient to the way they think, which is, oh my gosh, I need to think about what's going to happen if I do this. Can I give you a quick example?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I had a kid, and this is in my book, I had a kid at juvenile court. He was at the halfway house, which is where kids live while they're on probation, and he had been up at Spring Mountain Youth Camp. And and it's a step down to go to the halfway house. It's kind of the last step before you're released back onto probation. You're able to go home. So he was messing up, and he was going, and he would come back, and they would drug test him, and finding that, you know, he'd been using drugs, and he'd been leaving the home, because you're not supposed to leave the home. You're on house arrest. But anyway, so they wanted me to talk to him. So I did the quick interview and asked him, okay, tell me about the process when you go home. What starts to happen? And basically, when it would be night and everybody's gone to bed and he's in bed, he was starting to think about his friends and they were partying because he had been in contact with them. They're going to have girls over at the house. They're going to have all of these things that was part of his life before he got arrested. So what was missing is, okay, what happens when you go back to the halfway house on the weekend? You're going to be drug tested. So here's what I want you to do. So when you go home and you're laying there in bed, I want you to go through that same process. Think about your friends. Think about the party. Think about the drugs. Think about the alcohol. Think about the girls. I want you to think of all of that. Then what I want you to do is I want you to hear a knock on the door. And it's police. Open up. And so they come in. And they put you guys all up against the wall. They confiscate the drugs. They arrest you. They lead you out to the police cars, drive you down to juvenile court. They book you. You go into the holding cell. From the holding cell, you go back to the detention cell. And then on Monday morning, you're going to stand before the judge. And the judge is going to say to you, why is it that you can't quit doing this stuff? And you're going to have to give him an explanation. And then the judge is going to say to you, we've given you enough chances. This is it. Now you're going to Spring Mountain Youth Camp, which is really bad for those kids. It's a higher level of intervention. But it also lasts 9 months. Now, he's already gone through 6 months of Spring Mountain Youth Camp. He's gone through almost 2 months at the halfway house. But now you're going to extend to 9 months at that. And I go, here's what I want you to do. Think through that whole process and then make a decision what you're going to do that night. So he comes back the next week that I'm there teaching the class, and I pull him aside and I say, well, how did it go? And he goes, you ruined my weekend.
Yeah.
And I knew exactly what he was saying because, see, what had not happened was in his thinking process, he had no connection to the consequences. And by spending time thinking through that whole process to the consequences and picturing himself going to the Elko detention center, it changed the way he thought. And that's what's missing in most of us. So it's not just a matter of, controlling the behavior or controlling the emotion. It's understanding the whole process of what takes place if you don't think about what the consequences will be of acting out your behavior or engaging in these emotions.
Yeah. And also, too, I think, Brad, that we could talk about going back into an environment when you do start to make changes on your world, the way you're thinking, and then you're put back into maybe a dysfunctional family or a relationship or a job that you really hate or, gang members that you might be hanging out with. That has a lot of influence when people are really trying to make the changes. Who has the more power? That which you were, what you would like to be, or that which you're scared and you're kind of standing in the middle? Don't you think that has a lot of power too?
Oh, absolutely. Because that was one of the big problems with a lot of the kids that we would see, is you would see them going back into, that home where, the parenting maybe is not as good as what they need, a very dysfunctional family, a lot of different types of problems that create difficulty for these kids, and they're not at that level yet where they've learned how to cope with these things. So, yeah, it does shape what's going to happen once they get back in that situation. It's just like going into marriage and family counseling, and you talk to the therapist for an hour, and then you go home. You're back in the same environment. What are you going to do differently? How are you going to cope with the things that are going to come up? Because a 1 hour session for marriage and family isn't going to solve it, and learning all these skills isn't going to help you if you're not able to apply them into the situation you're going back into.
Yeah. I think also, too, the idea, sometimes people will say, but God is going to save me. God must have a reason why all this bad stuff is happening to me. Or God has another plan. Maybe I can just get through it. So there are many different versions of who or what people give power to. It could be a gang member who's going to put me on the straight and narrow, and, they're going to make me famous, or God's going to take care of me, and he must have a plan, but he wants me to do these things, and I keep doing them. So I think sometimes the idea of who is in charge, your mind, your body, some other people, some other place, some other theory, or some other belief, you really have to set that straight from the beginning, perhaps?
Each person has to make a decision. So whether it's the kids I work with or the men in the domestic violence, whether it's the people I saw in marriage and family counseling, they have to make a decision as to, are they going to allow these different influences to affect me? Because one of the big problems we saw with kids and gangs is that the gangs and their friends in the gangs had more influence than the parents did. And when you give your life over to any type of power, and that it's irrational from the sense that, is this power going to really get you what you need to be successful in life, then it becomes irrational because you're not seeing that the consequences of what has happened, and you go back into those same situations and have the same consequences. It's not moving you where you want to go with your life. It's not helping you to succeed or be successful.
Yeah. Let's talk for a second, Brad, about character. You speak about character in your book. What you think and how you behave shapes your character. But also, too, I think sometimes people will say, I really don't know what a good person looks like. Honest to goodness. I mean, I can tell you, I'm in my 70s, I've heard that over and over for many decades. People would say that. I don't know what that means. What does that look like? And they're trying to accomplish it based upon the reflections of what they've been through in their life. So even when you're working with the kids, they probably have never seen what a good person looks like. And it's almost like you're trying to say, that dish of asparagus, it really does taste like oranges. Or, that candy bar, it really does taste like it. Asparagus tastes like candy. I promise. And it's sort of like they just can't connect the two because they're so diverse and they're so different in their thoughts and in their knowing. It's like, how do you bridge that gap? Do you know what I mean? Because, because you see gang members and they got all this funky jewelry on and everything, and they got brand new cars and they got a big wad in their pocket. You know what I'm saying? And you're saying, but that's what you want. You want money, prestige, and you want to be known. But you're saying, but is it the right or the wrong way? So sort of the idea is, what is character and how do you decide how you want to build it for yourself? Like, what is a moral? I'll tell you, morals, people don't even know what a moral is anymore. Do you know what I mean? They say, but that's my truth. That's my belief. And then their truth and their belief is based upon another book of dogma. So how do they even find out what a moral is?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because our whole society is so turned upside down. And especially become manifested over the last several years, where we're constantly looking at media personality, news, talk shows. We're looking at politicians at all different levels of government. We're looking at people who are well-known, and we're constantly seeing just these people lie over and over again. And kind of the humorous aspect of it is it's almost at the point now where they just lie and don't even care if they get caught. And so going back to your question is, how do you find a way to understand what character is? Or how do you find a way to understand what good morals are, what morality is, when in the face of everything that we're seeing today, there's not a whole lot of good examples as to who do I want to follow? And then when the ones come up that would say be a good example to say, hey, this person is what I think I would like to model my life after or be like.
Mm-hmm.
And we would see that sometimes at juvenile court where kids would form a really close connection with the probation officer because they saw them as a role model, as somebody who, could kind of show them the way through life and help them to where they would be. In the face of everything that's going on in our society today, how do you find that? Because morals aren't being taught anymore. I mean, character is kind of dependent on the circumstance. If a person wants to act good, okay, I can act good now, but tomorrow I might be a totally different person, kind of a Jekyll and Hyde type of situation, where 1 minute I'm this wonderful Dr. Jekyll, but tomorrow I might be the hideous Mr. Hyde. So in teaching that, what we really do need is we need more men, especially men, because men are the ones that teach other men, but we need good women, Father, to teach women, but we need good men to teach these young men who are coming out of families where, if you look at the national statistics, you got over 70% within the Black community, boys are born into homes without a father. And that number goes to about 55% of Hispanics are born into a home without a father. And not to be left behind, that the white community is trying to catch up. And last numbers I saw, we were in the high 40s as to the number of males being born into homes without a father. So one of the biggest issues we have is down to the family, and that two-parent concept of, kids being able to see how you live in a relationship, in a marriage, how you treat a woman, how the woman treats the man, having a man there to teach his son how to grow up, the woman teaching her daughter how to live in a way that's going to benefit her and finding a good relationship and having a good education and men finding a good education or developing skills. So all that has been kind of done away with. So it becomes very hard to find those things. And quite frankly, there's some good agencies out there that try to do that type of stuff and does have a positive effect. But right now, there's such a dearth of ability to teach kids what it means to have good character, what it means to be moral people, and to live according to a moral code, an ethical code.
Right. Because also, too, I think the idea, when you say about how many families have a male figure in the home, I always liken it back to the thing about health insurance. Access does not mean you're utilizing it, So it doesn't matter whether there is or isn't sometimes a male in the house. The male could be there in physical form, but they could be 100% vacant, or 100% useless. So then that number goes up even higher, So I think the idea of, what are we truly looking at? Even the idea of a narcissist, there's a fine line between a narcissistic behavior and one who says, I'm going through life, I'm doing the best I can. If I make a mistake, I will correct my trajectory and have forgiveness and go forward, even though their life may look like a bunch of potholes. You know what I mean? So the idea is that we always want to find this perfect person to guide us along our way. But we have to understand, too, that humans are not perfect. But what we do also understand is, hey, I see you're not that perfect, but I would love to know, how did you make a change? How did you change your course? And when you get off course, what do you do to get back on? Isn't that the entire goal of your whole book?
Most of it, yeah. because there's a couple other aspects in there, which is, we haven't talked about, but it's the whole understanding of how the brain is wired and how it plays into a lot of the emotions and behaviors that we feel. But I agree with you that even if you have a male in the home and it's an absentee male, in fact, I was just in a men's meeting where the guy who was leading the group talked about how he, as a businessman, was a successful businessman, but his life was business, and that was the first priority, and how his wife and his children was a second priority. And to salvage his marriage, he needed to learn how to reprioritize his life. So I do believe that, you can have a male in the home. I mean, I even saw it with women who were in the home but were absentee mothers. And one girl comes to my mind who has become a great success. I just love her to death. But her mother was not there to really help her. And so she had to find other people, and I kind of became an honorary father figure to her, which she later told me that my being there for her while she was in the court system, knowing that once she got out, she could come back and talk to me anytime she wanted, is that it provided her some guidance. But the whole point is that you have to be there, that marriage and family has to be a priority, and we've even lost a lot of that in our society now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, too, Brad, when you talk about difficult emotions, in your book, I think we can't foresee what's going to come down the pike. Things do take you out. You do feel like you get T-boned sometimes, and you definitely feel like you hit the wall. But those are parts of life. It's how your action, reaction, and receptivity, where you are in all of those points. But I think sometimes people will say, I should have known better, and they can't forgive themselves. They just can't let that go. Do you think forgiveness and truly saying, I'm not a worse person for it, I'm better for it, that I see it, I'm better for it, that I recognize it, and that's my own forgiveness?
Right. Because in fact, I have a friend who, I don't counsel him, but, as a friend, you talk about things sometimes in their life and you try to give them some advice and stuff. But I see the inability to forgive ourselves as really one of the things that hold us back, that it's like a chain around our foot that doesn't allow us to get very far from where we are. And so learning how to forgive ourselves, and sometimes forgiveness is not even about something we did, it's about something we perceive that we think was our fault. And I saw that many times when I would work with people who were sexually abused, that they would see it as their fault. They should have done something different. They should have done something more. They should have spoke up. So they take on that abuse, that molest, as if it was their fault. And they have a great deal of difficulty forgiving themselves. But to move beyond and move into a productive life, it really does start with having, a clean slate in our own life, that there is nothing that we're holding on to from the past. There's nothing that we're not forgiving ourselves of, that it was an experience. We got through it the best we could. We're in a different place now. And that's part of the problem. Sometimes looking back at the past is that you're living in the future thinking that you should have known more or done more, when in fact you did the best you could during that circumstance. But forgiving yourself is a huge step. And added to that is, how do you forgive others if you can't forgive yourself?
Yeah. Well, I think that kind of society is really given us a short end of the stick, so to speak, because this whole idea about what is your legacy, what is this, tell us all about your life story, and people are like, oh, I wish I changed my name and I could step out of that paradigm. That's not my identity. That's things that were out there, I learned from them, I moved on, I did better, whatever. It's sort of stop. Sometimes society, it's almost as if it's written the template and you're only supposed to fill in the blanks. Don't you think?
Right. I think one of the interesting things that we have seen over the last couple years is this whole concept of wanting to do away with history.
Yes.
And change history and change it by tearing down monuments and destroying different aspects within our society, changing the names of schools. The reality is you can do all that you want and we can apply it to our own personal life. But the bottom line is when all of that is said and done, guess what? It didn't change one bit of history. And neither does doing some of these crazy things in our life do away with our history. It's learning how to live with our history and incorporating it into our life in a productive and meaningful way. I was talking to a guy the other day, and he was talking how when he came through being able to deal with being molested as a child and being able to resolve some of those childhood issues, it opened him up to becoming more empathetic to other people's problems, which is the wonderful aspect of doing it, is that all of a sudden now, instead of just seeing yourself as a victim, you're able to see that, hey, I have now put this into my life, and now I can have a lot more empathy and understanding of other people and their problems.
Right. But in a way, when you turn around and you do take down the monuments, or we do turn around and change the story about what you do, I think it takes away, it kind of like it's when you're getting to the end of the sentence. It doesn't have any more power over you, and it no longer is your history. But when you say it, you're not repeating the story all the time to drag up the emotions, because it doesn't set off a trigger. When you share your story to teach others how you may have gone through there, you're just basically reporting. You're sharing an observation. You're sharing something, that was there, and that's it. And it doesn't trigger you anymore. So I think in a way, with the taking down the, whatever, the erasing history or whatever, I think it's teaching us something we may have not even noticed yet what it's teaching us, the full story, but it may be teaching us that stop being triggered and tethered by the past. And isn't that as simply as we could put it?
No, that is absolutely important to realize, is that our past can shape us, and it can shape us even long into the present, things from 30, 40 years ago. Or it can be things that become constructive in changing our lives and who we are today.
Yeah. I live in the city of New Orleans, and, everybody celebrates those things that have happened to people. Awesome, that happened. Awesome, that happened. Instead of basically always dredging up how awful and, all that other stuff. So I think the idea, even, at the end of life, it's about having a celebration of life versus, the other connotation of death. So I think sometimes it's all about your perspective, where you are, who's surrounding you, how you navigate within your time of life. That's going to be able to help your emotions and your feelings to really sit back and look at them. Sometimes people will say, I can't right now. And you know what we need to say? Okay, you can't right now. That's fine. But I know you'll come around when you're ready, or when you have a space, or when it hits you too much, or when you're ready to be able to truly look at it. So I think the idea is that sometimes we think that everybody should be on the same plane, everybody should be controlling their emotions, everybody should be better people. That really is kind of an illusion that we're not really at yet. Yes?
Right. There are people that are not willing to let go of things. There's people that are not willing to change, even though they have all of the information they need to change. There's those that are not willing to give up drinking or to quit doing drugs, even though they can see the destruction that it's wrought. So, life is a process, and sometimes it takes time to get to that point where you're really willing, like AA calls it, hitting the bottom. But it takes time to get to that point to see that I want my life to be different. And, for me with emotions, the whole idea of writing this book, because, the class began as teaching, a teaching thing that I did put together for all of the probation officers in the Police Officer Standard Academy training. And I was coming to the end of my career, and I was seeing these men and women in their 40s into their 50s that had developed all types of health problems.
Right.
And so one of the things was, before I left, I had come in contact with a video called Stress Portrait of a Killer by National Geographic, which is a fantastic video, 50-minute video. But that kind of brought everything together for me. And so I took it to my supervisor, probation supervisor. He wasn't my supervisor, but the probation supervisor at the site where I was at. And I said, take a look at this. And he did. And I said, I think this would be a great class for police officers and probation officers, detention officers. And I said, I think that this is really needed, because what you don't understand, or what many of these officers don't understand, is how on-the-job stress that they're not able to let go of when they get home is causing health problems. And in doing this training, we can address this and start to give them ideas of ways that they can start making some changes. But the first thing is to educate them on the fact that if your body stays in, especially in law enforcement of any type, it's not just stress, it's a constant vigilance that you have to be on guard for what might happen. And so I was seeing these officers, 40s, 50s, high blood pressure, heart disease, hypothyroidism, metabolic syndrome. There was all types of problems that they were developing. And this is at an age where, you're supposed to be your most productive in life, that your career is well on the way. And so I took that to them and, began to teach them. Some of them, boy, they latched onto it right away and said, oh, my gosh. I remember one guy that I would see at the gym 2 years after he retired, and he goes, man, that class was the best thing I ever had, because it had changed his outlook in life, and that he didn't have to live constantly under stress. And so I think that, again, there was other officers that, I'm glad I'm the heck out of here when it was over. But, I think that's just kind of the way life is, that there are people who are ready to hear that information. There are people that couldn't care less because their life's going a different direction.
Yeah. So, I think in closing too, Brad, I've always said that there's people out there, it's their mission to be a trigger. And there's other people who are out there who receive the lesson. It's sort of, if there wasn't someone that was out there really hitting the wall and drinking, we wouldn't say, those are our role models. Those are people who are out there. And we always think of them in a negative connotation, but we always forget to look and say, wow, I see that. That's just a picture in front of me, and I'm going, oh, wow. And it kind of triggers something in yourself to change. And then you help each other, do you know what I mean, along the path. Sometimes people want to cast out their negative emotions or cast out their experiences or other people. And it kind of really isn't benefiting the good of all. So I think your book, Take Control of Your Life, is about being able to see it for yourself, maybe see it in another person, maybe help each other along the way, maybe reach out for support and join a group. So there are many different ways in which you can manage your emotions, your feelings, and your life around you. And it's not about doing a solo journey and being a victim. It's about standing up. And when you stand up, what happens? Somebody sees you, and you be seen, and you be heard. And I think that's really what everybody's looking for, perhaps.
I think that's absolutely correct, because what you find is, especially, how many people isolate themselves, how many people are not open and talking about things in their life. And what I have found is that when you do open that part of your life up, or you're ready to, make some changes, there are people out there who will step up and help you. There's a lot of ways that you can get help, and that is an important component, that there's a lot of caring people out there who are doing things to help people. I see it all the time, people around me, and some of the amazing things they do.
I work so much with patients at the end of life, and I said one time to a bunch of women, I said, we all need to meet together and have a lunch, and we'll have one person stand up and say about their devastating story that they kind of have been holding on to, secret, so to speak, and then the next lady would stand up and she'd throw her handkerchief in the middle of the pile and say, I got one better than that. Here's my story. And another would say, I got one better than that. Here's my story. You know what I mean? But then what you find out is that, wow, we all have something inside of us, something that's been stuck down in there forever. And we can choose to take it with us to the next life, or we could choose to just let it go. And wow, wouldn't it be so freeing if we did have those kinds of meetings where, hey, I got this, I got that, but you know what? It didn't affect you standing there. You're just as good as you were coming in as you are going out. You know what I mean? But you let all that stuff on the table. So I think we can be free to let it all go on the table, right?
No, absolutely. It's just having that willingness to be open.
Right, absolutely. Brad, could you share with the listeners how to find out more information about your work? That would be wonderful.
Right now, most everything I do is volunteer. I position myself really well through retirement with the county, and I do have some Social Security work and construction in my life. So, most everything I do in counseling is I counsel with people who I don't charge them. And, I teach some classes. The kind of sad thing for me was I was finally getting ready to start to try to do some speaking, but the pandemic had shut everything down for 2 years. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that, I haven't been motivated to kind of pursue that again. But most of the stuff I do now is just counseling, encouraging, or teaching a class. It was, I just taught a class recently that was helping people deal with the addiction to pornography and some of the problems it was creating in their life and in their marriages. So, and I do all that for free, just kind of pay back. I've had a good life. God's been good to me. I appreciate everything that I got. So, I'm just more than happy to give back. I was hoping that the book would kind of open some doors to start like a speaking career to get out there and share the message. But once the pandemic happened and 2 years went, that kind of changed that whole trajectory.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Brad, where's your book? Do you have a website? Is your book available?
Yeah, I have a website. It's Brad-Garrett.com, and that's because the comedian Brad Garrett has consumed the whole internet with his name. So mine is Brad-Garrett.com. I have a website, and I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not on the other social media. It's very time-consuming to do all that, and I stay very active, at my house, and I do all my own work and do all my own stuff. But So that's about it. But I love helping people, and so I always try to make myself available out there to anybody. And a lot of the people that I work with aren't in a situation where they either have the assurance or the money to be able to go pay a therapist. So I try to make myself available to them.
Very good. Well, Brad, thank you so much.
And my book is my book is on sale. You can buy it at BarnesandNoble.com, Amazon.com, and it's easily accessible.
Very good. Well, Brad, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure to have you with us.
It's been a pleasure being with you, Dr. Jeanette. I look forward to seeing the finished product.
Very good. Well, if you'd like to find out more information about Brad Garrett, again, the book is Take Control of Your Life, Overcoming Life's Obstacles, Difficult Emotions, and Problem Behavior. Please do click on the link on the bottom of today's show page to go directly to his website. And if you have a group that would love to have Brad as a guest speaker, please do reach out to him directly through his website. And it is about being able to give back, help others, be able to reach through and see who we can touch in their heart and soul, and be able to say, yes, there are many potholes in the road. Goodness gracious, all of these roads in the U.S., they've got all kinds of holes in them, but you know what? We can walk around them. We can form a bridge over them, or perhaps we can sit down and say, this time in my life, I just need to sit down here and watch it get bigger and bigger, or perhaps just take a moment in time to enjoy the sun. It's all about saying, wherever you are, do the best you can. When you need help, reach out and help others. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Dr. Jeanette-Gallagher, and until tomorrow, have a great day.
Today we discussed many life-changing concepts. Who do you turn to, and how do you know what is best when faced with a health crisis? Dr. Jeanette is a patient advocate. She listens to the patient, the doctors, and the family, clarifies the health issues and concerns, then helps the patient make the best choices going forward. If you would like help implementing change into your life and health, we can talk and see where you are stuck and how to improve the quality of your life. Check the link on the bottom of today's show page or visit dr-jeanette-gallagher.com to schedule a phone appointment today.